I think you both certainly gave us a lot to think about going forward. Next, I have the honor of introducing our debate moderator Pierre DeVry. Pierre is a distinguished advisor and co-director of the Spectrum Policy Initiative here at Silicon Flatirons. His current work focuses on maximizing the value of radio operation by managing potential and actual interference, both before and after rulemaking. Pierre and our debaters join us today in a legal debate that questions the role of trust in the community and the extent to which that distrust is likely to facilitate legal changes. Pierre, I cede the floor to you now.
Thanks very much, Victoria. And if the other debaters could join us on stage, thank you very much. It's a very hard act to follow, Andy and Cristelia. We'll do our best. We have a wonderful lineup of folks here today. We're going to have a debate, and you can see the topic of the debate there. Today's distrust in big tech is healthy. The way we do this debate is that we're going to have a poll at the beginning and at the end. So you're going to vote whether you agree or disagree, yes or no. If Vanessa could bring the poll up, it's a Zoom poll. Please vote whether you believe or agree with that statement or not. While you vote in the next minute or so, why don't I take the time to say a little bit more about the format, but first to introduce our speakers. I commend their bios to you. You can go to the web page for today and look at it. But first up, in favor, we have Paul Ohm, who's a professor of law at Georgetown and also a sadly missed colleague here at Colorado. He's also Associate Dean for Academic Affairs there and Chief Data Officer. Also on his side, speaking in favor, is Devon Desai, who's an Associate Professor at the Schiller College of Business at Georgia Tech. He's also the area coordinator for law and ethics there. Speaking on the other side, leading off, we have Professor Jane Bambauer, Professor of Law at University of Arizona. And her second is Sienna Listerkin, who is an Associate Professor of Law at George Mason. As always, we try to involve students in our programs here at Flatiron. So we will have a table setting by a couple of students. Graham Stevenson, who is a Boulder native. He's a first-year law student here, undergraduate in maths. And on the other side, yes, please, everybody vote. You should have that screen in front of you and click the yes or the no button. On the other side, we have Taylor Hartley, who is an MBA student, Naval Intelligence veteran. She actually recently moved to Colorado from Japan. So I think hopefully we'll have enough results now that we can close the poll so that you can see the numbers where we start. The goal of today's debate, so you can see that 94% of you felt
That's a setup. Let's do it again.
Now, one of the things that regulars at Silicon Flatirons will know is that Paul is the keystone of these debates, and Paul was reprising his role of I'm being set up there, a well-known and well-performed role. And so it's been set up so that Paul can only lose because in the course of the debate, the other side are going to try and change your mind, and Paul and Devon are going to try and make you hold the line and deepen your distrust of tech today. So the way we're going to do the debate is we will have a table setting by first Graham and then Taylor. Then we will have opening remarks. Each of our four debaters will speak for 5 minutes. We'll have a discussion, and then there'll be closing arguments, and then you get to vote again, and Paul gets to claim that it was all a huge fraud. So
we could lose our three, you know.
Yes. Well, well, the thing is, what Paul has to do is he has to bring new people to the ballot in the next hour and make them vote for his position.
I want to make it clear that we were not allowed to vote. So.
Yes.
With all due respect to Jane, I'll just drum up some folks from George Mason and we'll be fine.
Yeah. So Devin will drop off for a few minutes and bring in some folks off from the street from outside the Library of Congress, where he is now, to get them to vote. Okay, good. So with that introduction, why don't I hand it over to Graham for his table setting for the motion in favor. Graham.
Awesome. Thank you, Pierre. For many years, we gave big tech a free pass. We ignored and forgave privacy and antitrust sins because of the constant flow of groundbreaking innovations that transformed the ways we connect with the world. But in recent years, these developments have slowed and our initial optimism has shifted into scrutiny and doubt. The question we face today is whether the mounting distrust is healthy. As the following stories illustrate, we believe that it is. Last fall, Apple announced 2 new privacy features for its latest iteration of the iOS operating system. In a blog post published just before Data Privacy Day, the company claimed that the new features would put the power of protecting privacy back into the hands of the consumer. The first requires developers listed in Apple's App Store to disclose all of their privacy practices in a new, quote, privacy nutrition label. The second and much more powerful feature, quote, requires apps to get the user's permission before tracking their data across other apps or websites. But the potential impacts of these features are immediately clear to privacy buffs and laypeople alike. Over the past few years, the business model of data tracking, collection, and sale has garnered widespread negative attention. It's unsurprising that this spread of knowledge has prompted calls for new regulations, which have already begun to materialize in laws such as the GDPR and CCPA. It's equally unsurprising that a company like Apple, with its greater reliance on paid services and hardware, has spent the past few years painting itself as an arbiter of consumer privacy protections. These new features fall neatly in line with Apple's campaign. Of course, it's natural to be cynical of Apple's motives. After all, since Apple doesn't rely on consumer data quite as much as some of its rivals, like Facebook and Google, the privacy campaign appears an obvious tactic to boost its consumers' trust and thus boost its bottom line. And perhaps that's okay. If Apple is fighting for consumer rights, then we shouldn't complain. But this argument ignores a deeper issue. Apple is using its privacy protection campaign to deflect attention away from its own anti-consumer tactics. Just last week, the New York Times opinion team used leaked location data to track down several Capitol rioters. This data initially came to the Times with no contact information attached, but the team managed to match the location data with iPhone advertising identifiers. These identifiers are unique IDs tied to specific iPhones that, with a little elbow grease, can be combined with the data from other sets to reveal the personal information of the phone's users. Apple actually allows app developers to request these advertising identifiers, provided that the iPhone user hasn't actively dug through their settings to disable the feature. Apple has also recently come under fire for its App Store practices. In 2019, Spotify issued a complaint to the European Union against Apple, alleging that Apple Music unfairly competes with Spotify since Apple Music isn't subject to its 30% App Store transaction fees. In the fall of last year, Epic Games, the maker of the video game Fortnite, filed an antitrust lawsuit against Apple after Fortnite was removed from the App Store for violations of its draconian in-app transaction rules. A short time after Apple's privacy feature announcement, Facebook announced that it would assist Epic in its lawsuit against Apple. Coincidentally, guess whose business will be most affected by Apple's new iOS privacy features? Facebook. The circular drawing of battle lines between these companies hints at the merits of distrusting them. While the effects of their policing may appear to serve consumers, these stories highlight that the big tech companies have a single goal: profit. What's worse, they are accountable only to themselves and whichever people are both informed and privileged enough to avoid using their products, a group not nearly sufficient to influence their actions. Accountability, these companies intervene only when and where it's convenient for them, and only to the extent that it builds consumer sentiment and gets the government off their backs. But the few things that they do that are good for consumers are far outweighed by the things they do that are not. Now that the flow of innovation has slowed, the big tech companies are content to rest on their laurels while taking jabs at one another and gobbling up any small companies that pose a threat to their business. For as long as these practices remain unrestrained, there is no compelling reason to believe that big tech will deserve any consumer trust. Thank you.
Well, that was perfect to the second. Thank you very much, Graham. And handing it over to Taylor.
All right. Thank you, Graham. Thank you, Pierre. And thank you, everyone, for joining us here today on Zoom. An impressive piece of technology we've been trusting and utilizing to continue our work, education, and connectivity during this pandemic. I can also assure you, as a naval intelligence veteran, I'm well versed in technology, especially technology that's been keeping us safe at home here in the United States. But today, I'm here to discuss distrust in tech. And is the current distrust in tech healthy? The answer is no. And it's important to note that you don't have to love technology to vote no. Although I agree that a certain level of skepticism is healthy, we will be addressing this extreme scale of distrust and its underlying dangers. We will do so by addressing two different themes. Theme one will cover how distrust muddies our perception of big tech. We have identified how the real distrust lies not within the technological sources, but in some of its users. So we ask that you think again, do I distrust all the technology around me, serving me day to day, or do I distrust the misuse of technology by certain individuals? I say this as I am sure we are all aware of the capabilities of our devices and applications we are using. Technology is a tool that we utilize. Facebook and Google are not our puppet master. Productivity that is caused having this unhealthy point of view. There are dangers lurking in creating a mass of distrusting individuals against technology. The same threats we've seen in the massive distrust against other institutions in our country. If the last few months have taught us anything, you can lose control of your fans very quickly. This reflexive reaction against tech doesn't mean that people are suddenly woke to the issues and complex trade-offs between beneficial and harmful uses of data. Perhaps it means that they are misinformed. And as a business student, my curriculum covers extensively just how important disruptive innovation is. It's what pushes our economy forward. Distrust will not lead to new disruptive technology. It will hinder it. Then overall, there's just this massive hypocrisy. People don't distrust tech as much as it's often portrayed in social media or on the news. People aren't running into the woods and going off grid, leaving their tech behind. Today, if you voted, you trusted your phone, your laptop, your desktop, whatever it was, to send your vote, to send your voice. You trusted it without hesitation. Right? And we do this every single day to navigate from place to place, to talk to our loved ones. Technology was here for us during COVID. Creative innovation got us to this point. What would a pandemic have looked like 10, 20 years ago? And we have all these capabilities, and at what cost? You know, maybe you just get an advertisement for something you actually want. So I've had a lot of fun with this topic and doing research and really trying to help formulate my own opinion on it. And I had a wonderful time with Jane and Siona, and I can't wait to hear them expand upon these in more detail. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Taylor, and thank you, Graham, as well. They will drop off the screen now, but they will be gone but not forgotten. Hopefully also particularly not forgotten by those of you who are hiring. They are two of the many wonderful students we have here at CU, and I hope you'll be in touch with them, if not others. So moving on to the opening remarks phase, we will turn to Professor Ohm. Paul, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Pierre. As longtime Silicon Flatirons visitors know, this is not my first rodeo. I have taken part in all 4 of the debates that we've had at this annual conference. And for those who have been here before, you know that my standard MO is I try and say things that are kind of on the cusp of polite company to outrage half the people in the room, and in so doing, lose a few of the people that voted against me and lose some of the people that voted for me and have a lot of vote swapping going on. I think I'm dealing with a thinner margin of error here with only 3 of you. And the last thing I'd want to do is offend or outrage the 3 of you. So let me talk to the 3 of you. I'm guessing you're older. I'm just kidding. So what I want to say is, first of all, the students did a wonderful job, and it was a really nice opportunity to work kind of in another dimension on these debates. I kind of want to prove the proposition that the distrust in today's tech is healthy in 2 steps. That the distrust in big tech that people experience today is warranted, and that distrust is a healthy response to bring some reform that is sorely needed. So let's start with the first. The world is pretty broken. I don't think I need to work very hard to convince you of that. The litany of what ails us goes way beyond tech, but focusing on tech in particular, we are rife in disinformation and misinformation. We suffer from insecurity and a lack of privacy. We've seen the rise of business models that fuel income inequality. We're beset by technologies that fuel white supremacy and racism, other forms of subordination. It's getting worse and it's not getting better. Big tech is at least partly to blame for every one of those things. And a key point I want to make in response to our wonderful student who spoke for our opponents is our brief here isn't to prove that all tech is distrust. You can find the pockets of technology that are better, and you can find the pockets of technology that are worse. It is our burden to prove that there is some distrust of tech and that that's a healthy response. I can imagine, in fact, an alternative world where we had a bunch of benevolent purveyors of tech who gave us exactly what we needed to advance who we are, to strengthen the bonds of our society, to improve the conditions of our democracy, to lead us into better versions of ourselves and our work. I could have imagined that 20 years ago. And maybe over the last 20 years, I held on to kind of a little optimism that that was what we would get from the people who build our technology. But 20 years has taught me through time and time, and I'm happy throughout this debate to point to specific examples, that we can't trust many of the people who are in charge. Each tech fiasco that we encounter whittles away the last remaining believers in trust. Any residual trust has been dashed against the disappointment of the fecklessness of the tech companies who are supposedly here to give us the tools that we needed. And I'm sorry to say that the only conclusion I can draw is that we are not gifted with leaders of technology companies today who are nuanced and wise. We're not gifted with the framers of the future society that I wish we had been. We're gifted with leaders of big tech, not all of them, but many of them who lack the backbone or moral compass or fortitude or foresight to fix what ails us. And in that state of the world, we need something that will give them a kick in the pants. So step 2 of my brief or my argument is I think distrust will fuel the political will to bring the solutions we need. Mistrust is useful. It fuels a will to action. Things can be better. We can do better. We can make things better, but we need that political will. We need the political will to get our governments to respond. We need the political will to get shareholders to say something. And that political will come from a healthy, not overblown, but a healthy distrust of the technology of today. Thank you. I'm looking forward to the exchange of ideas.
Wonderful. Thank you, Paul. That's set up a very nice challenge for the other side. And with that, I'll turn to Professor Bambauer.
Right. The US and most of its citizens has drastically benefited from immigration. I know we're here to talk about tech, but bear with me for a minute. Despite abundant evidence of social and economic improvements brought by immigration in all of its forms, only 1/3 of Americans think that immigration in the United States should increase. The rest think that the level should either stay the same or decrease, and it's because they don't trust immigrants. Even this, though, marks a huge change from the early 90s when almost nobody wanted immigration to increase. It required decades of sustained and continuing work from academics and from the public media to get attitudes about immigration to soften and to help people understand that immigration is a positive sum rather than a zero-sum proposition. And there's still work to be done. The current level of distrust in big tech is unhealthy because it's unjustified. Collectively, we discount the myriad ways that technology companies, including the Big Four, have incentives that align with consumers and with the general public. And thus, yeah, they use capitalistic self-interest, but in a way that serves as an engine for win-win outcomes. To be clear, I'm not saying this always happens, but it usually happens. At the same time, people have exaggerated the sense of threat. And this is true even for the hard examples that people hate, like behavioral advertising and data aggregating. On balance, context-only advertising that doesn't use personal data, it rewards content creators that help segment their audience into consumer or political pigeonholes better. That's what happened in Europe after the Data Protection Directive took place. That's what will happen here too. Behavioral advertising gives users more power. It essentially lets users reward the content creators so that those creators can get a premium on their ad sales without having to pitch the content itself to satisfy the advertisers. All right, let's take data aggregators, another thoroughly loathed category of middlemen merchants. Every study I've seen from natural experiments in the field shows that data aggregators allow people to access more and inexpensive services or products or credit, and that on balance, lower income people benefit the most from it. Even social media companies like Facebook, who are much maligned these days for maximizing engagement and laying waste in our attention economy, they're attacked in these visceral and highly emotional terms that don't actually make much sense once you simmer it down and pay attention to the substance. Facebook and Google have extremely limited ability to actually control and manipulate its users. What I mean is that even when it comes to advertising, and that's their forte is advertising, even when it comes to advertising, good experiments show that following a well-timed advertisement, the conversions to sale that Google and Facebook are happy to claim credit for, they actually would have happened they more likely than not would have happened with the exact same company and the exact same product, even if an ad hadn't been shown at all. So any social scientist too, who's tried to make predictions based on a lot of data, even big or huge data sets, they know that perfect prediction is impossible. Really good prediction is extremely hard. And that interventions in behavior can't diverge too far from what a person, at least in some sense, maybe some short-sighted, but in some sense that they actually want. So any claim to the contrary is snake oil and posturing. Now, I'm not claiming, I'm trying not to tell a Panglossian story. We are suffering from a problem of abundance. Our short-term desires or preconditioned behavior can be catered to too easily. These are similar problems, though, that we had with mass production of food, with our diets and the Twinkie problem. So we have to figure out how to handle the sort of information Twinkie problem that we have today. But this is not a story of corporation versus the individual and society. It's a problem of the individual versus individual and society. Also, data can be, and certainly sometimes is, misused by crooks, fraudsters, the government, and others whose missions are misaligned with public values. And there are some dangers in specific cases and specific instances for reasons to distrust data holders. The same is true for immigrants. The same is true for people. So if the last year of wild polarization and isolation has taught me anything, it's that we're starving for some dispassionate problem solving, and we're suffering from a glut of reactive distrust. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jane. Although here in this debate, we want lots of passion and no dispassion. And for that, I will turn to Professor Desai. I will apologize to him and to you. I gather that he had prepared us a Bollywood highlight reel to essentially support his points, which we are going to have to miss. But maybe there'll be another opportunity later. Professor Desai, over to you.
Thanks. So extra disclosure, I was at Google for 2 years. And what I loved was even, shall we say, folks of the Paul Ohm ilk would sometimes come up to me and say, was it awesome? Was it awesome? And I'll tell you honestly, no, it's a company. There's some tremendous things that come out of that. But what I'm hearing so far is disruption, innovation, don't cut it off. Nonsense. Let me ask you a few questions about this. Facebook sits there and goes, oh, we're so sorry. We shared with Spotify and Netflix. So what do you get from that? Well, yeah, let's suppose I posted a picture of a samosa and the fact that I liked Hip Hop Evolution. I'm going to get some ridiculous thing about Bollywood. And I happen to hate Bollywood, even though I'm Indian. It's just not enough. Even Melinda Gates, and granted, when you've already, sucked your life out of a whole bunch of people through Microsoft, you get to sit back and say, oh, look at me. But she said, look, the problem is the solution seems to be an app and some ads that's going to change everything. It's not aimed at bigger problems, and maybe we should be doing more. I think that's part of what Paul and I are trying to get at. And I want to give an extra layer here. Why is it that all the tech founders have run away? Have you noticed this? Larry and Sergey, we've been out of here for a while. Jeff Bezos, I'm out. They're all leaving. You know why? Their companies are stale. They're not innovating. They're in the cash cow phase. That's just where they are. They're on to their other projects. Why do you set up Alphabet? Probably because all the cool innovation is elsewhere. Now, you might say, well, we need to let those go. But remember, what we're talking about here, and with all due respect to Taylor, I too am at a business school. I'm familiar with the notion of tech disruption. And the problem is, I think what Paul and I are getting at is, we're talking about big tech. Is it fair to say, oh, these are tools? Of course. But there is an intersection of how all this plays out. And believe it or not, in 2009, this came out, I wrote way back, treating a person like a resource is an error. Saying you signed a contract, we can do what we want, error. It's those sort of practices that we want. And to Jane's point, government, university researchers, industries, that's where you're going to get actual trust that it's about science and industry trying to make progress broadly, not just for a small group and with extreme profit, right? Like that's our claim. That's where it's all shifted. Think about Silicon Valley, the show. I couldn't watch it. It was too honest. It was like a bad documentary. It was like making the world a better place, making the world a better place. I was like, oh, really? Like that? And what is your vision of that? I don't know, but it's cool. I just got a whole bunch of data and money. Like to the claim, show me the innovations. And of course, there'd be moments here and there. But the question is, at the scale that these companies are at, and the amount of cash, by the way, they're all sitting on multi-billions. Where's that innovation investment? Right now, there's small incremental things, but that's the point, is the trade-offs we're getting for this level. I don't think going into the big tech companies and saying, what are you up to, is the same as saying, oh, disruptors, right? Disruptors are going to be from the outside anyway. So why are we believing that these are the disruptors? They're not. They're the big dogs. They're the ones that disruptors have to come in and pop upside the head. And, you know, if they, to be honest, if you're one of those disruptors, you may get bought and maybe you're happy with your exit. But that is the big question, right? That's where it changes, is how much are we really buying into the notion that, oh, just let it be. And sure, we're going to get that to come out. In terms of responsibility, I think Paul nailed this, right? There is a lot here. And to quote from actually Emanuel Wallerstein, the issue is a misunderstanding. Absolute monarchs originally didn't actually have as much power as people thought. But the key was they claimed the right to have unlimited power. And what's happening here is it's not clear what sort of genuine limits we can put on new structures that have huge societal effects. And with that, since it's 1 minute, I'll stop.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. To wrap up this first round, we're going to turn to Professor Listerkin.
All right, thanks. This is a great start to our conversation. And I think Paul and Devin, you've both made really credible arguments if we were having a different debate, right? So Paul, I think you're debating whether we should have some privacy legislation. Devin, I think you're debating whether or not we should date tech founders. I'm not sure, but today's topic is whether distrust of big tech is healthy, and it is not. And Taylor, Jane, and I are arguing that there are two reasons why distrust of big tech is not healthy. The first is that it makes us myopic, right? And Jane laid out a number of arguments of the benefits that we're possibly not calibrating. I mean, Devin, you're saying they're not innovating. Just this November, Google announced that they're mapping proteins to identify, rare conditions. We're going to have self-driving cars potentially a decade faster than otherwise would have happened. That's going to save tens of thousands of lives, right? So distrust makes us myopic. I'm going to focus though more on our second argument, that today's distrust of big tech is not healthy because it's entirely counterproductive, right? I mean, I think there's 84 participants on this webinar right here, and I suspect that we would all have unique idealized versions of what the interaction between society and technology should look like in the next few years, right? And not one of those idealized versions is well served by today's distrust. Okay, I mean, let's think about what's fueling today's distrust of big tech, right? So in 2018, according to a Pew poll, 70% of respondents thought that big tech was a net positive in the United States. Okay, and as you might suspect, right, the reason we're having a conference on trust and a debate on distrust, those numbers have plummeted, right? So more recently, there isn't an exact parallel question, but trust is down to below 50%. So why? What is fueling that rise in distrust? Right? And frankly, I'm sorry, but they're not having the debate that Paul and Devin are having, right? The rise in distrust that we're seeing isn't coming because we're suddenly more awake to the privacy concerns, right? Or to this capital that's just sitting there unused, or to antitrust, right? I mean, the rise in today's big trust is at least in part, but in large part, coming because in the US, right, a third of our country believes that big tech is biased against them and they're censoring political speech. All right, and we'll point to specific events like Twitter, throwing off 36 white supremacists and conspiracy theorists off the platform. Right? That's today's distrust in big tech. That's what's fueling today's distrust in big tech, and it's not healthy. Right? I don't even think it's legitimate, but we have to acknowledge it. I mean, that's what we're talking about right now. So we don't have to discuss these legitimate or illegitimate elements of today's distrust. But I think, we should take this moment to simmer down, right? Devin, I think it was you that said that Google, it's not awesome, it's a company, right? And for the most part, the companies that make up big tech are neither good nor bad. They are companies, right? And we are consumers, and we are policymakers in some cases, right? We are voters, right? So we can behave accordingly. All right, now, Paul, I wrote this down. You said that we should use the distrust to fuel the political will. And I'm virtually bopping you over the head with my pencil, right? You're going to leverage distrust to fuel the political will, right? What a dangerous game, right? We have learned that leveraging distrust to get some idealized policy goal doesn't always go the way you think it's going to go. Right? Distrust is an incredibly interesting emotion, and at the societal level, it has the tendency to metastasize and to go awry. And that's literally what is happening with distrust of big tech right now. Right? So distrust of big tech is not healthy. It's not healthy because it clouds the mind, right? It makes it hard to weigh the costs and benefits of the industry. And also, it's just counterproductive. So I am looking forward to our back and forth here, and let's get going.
Thank you very much, Siona. I feel like somebody on actually TV. Anybody remember TV when they had these? It's like, just wait, there's more. So this was just the beginning, and actually I'll say this again at the end, but I'm just in awe of our debaters, and I'm so grateful for all the prep they've evidently done. What we're going to do now is we're going to move into the Worldwide Wrestling Tag Team phase of the debate. Essentially, each side will have a chance to ask a question of the other side will answer, and then we'll ask a question in turn. And so, we'll go, Paul, Jane, Devin, Siona, although if they want to tag each other and change up the order, that's fine too. If the questions turn out not to be questions, I will use moderator's privilege to cut people off and say, so what exactly was your question there, please, counsel? And so with that, let's start. Paul, you get the first question.
Those were powerful and persuasive arguments. I'm willing to concede. I take it back. One thread that I heard in common from both of you was your deep desire to focus on the commercial, to treat technology as a kind of place where transactions happen and people buy and sell things. And I understand why that's a really comfortable place for the two of you. And in fact, Siona explicitly referenced concerns about speech and how these technology companies are the arbiters of our speech. And I think she was arguing, don't look over there. There's nothing to see there. Those are crazy conservatives who think they're being censored when they're not. And so to follow Pierre's exhortation and turn it into a question, which Facebook policy was the correct one when they said, we're not the arbiters of speech and we want nothing to do with it? or the more recent one when they said, okay, maybe we sometimes are the arbiters of speech, or the ridiculous more recent turn when they said, and we're going to create a Supreme Court of Facebook to help us be wise and just arbiters of speech. Which of those three is the one that you think was the appropriate one and worthy of the trust that you two have in these companies?
Go for it, Sienna. You're muted.
Paul, that's exactly the wrong question to be asking, and exactly why distrust is just distracting you, right? It's a lot more fun to talk about Zuckerberg or to talk about, a lunatic on a private island, getting a call from his general counsel about whether they should kick Trump off of Twitter. I get it, right? And we can have that discussion. But my point is that distrust of big tech is outside of this conversation, right? I could point to 100 political leaders, right, that had more impact on the scope of what was being said, right, at different points of time. And so, whether the question in 2019 or 2021 about what to do, which policy was correct about these platforms, is frankly, I think, a distraction from bigger questions.
Okay, so I think that's an answer. So Jane, would you like to lob something over to the other side? Or Sienna, if she wishes.
Yes, I would. So it seems to me that Paul and Devin used a version of distrust that hews pretty closely to what they specifically don't trust about tech, rather than the type of distrust that's actually rampant. So, if we take Shoshana Zuboff's theory of what big tech is doing, and this is stuff regularly published in the New York Times and quite representative of how at least one end of the ideology, half the country thinks, I guess. She literally believes in a conspiracy theory where Facebook and Google know us more intimately than we know ourselves and make decisions for us. And if you think that I am exaggerating, please go reread her op-ed again. She says that. So if we're thinking about that kind of emotion-driven perception of technology, and if we combine the Shoshana Zuboffs in the world with the Josh Hawleys in the world, how do you expect to actually get to the policies that you two, and I'll add Graham as well, Graham who introduced us all, that you actually think are best for big tech? I mean, because I've heard you talk about problems of stale firms and not enough, wanting to make sure that there's a path for startups and competition. But the policies that Zuboff and Hawley would agree on and that have the most political capital right now are not good for startups. They're not good for anyone.
So I think the question that Jane is asking is, what policies, Paul and Devin, do you actually want?
No, that's not what I'm asking.
Okay, what are you asking?
I'm asking what they think.
Jane doesn't have a question because Jane is changing the contours of the question.
No,
the question is healthy distrust.
Let Devin.
Let me try a one-sentence question.
Thank you.
Do you actually believe that the public's distrust, not your own, but the public's distrust, will lead to good policy outcomes?
I am less worried, clearly, than you two about gradations of distrust, right? No matter who you are on the political spectrum, someone has a crazy distrust that not only do you not subscribe to, but you just think is not rational. I think distrust is a pretty big tent, right? I think it's a tent, and I actually think you're overblowing Zuboff, but I'm not here to defend Zuboff. That's next year's debate. But I think we could have Hawley-style distrust and Zuboff-style distrust, and what Devin and I are trying to establish that there is distrust that is healthy. We're not trying to prove that all distrust is healthy. And even Josh Hawley, like, I'm going to go out on a limb and say Josh Hawley in his specifics has some proposals that are dangerous and would be terrible for society. But Josh Hawley's fundamental concern is that there are arbiters of speech with way too much power led by terrible people. I am with him there, brother. Like, Josh Hawley is crazy, except when he's not, and he's more often crazy than not. And so even that trust fits within this big tent of distrust that I think is healthy, right? It's not always right, but it's healthy. It's pushing us toward asking questions about reform and change.
So I think that one thing that might be helpful here is just to restate the motion. It's that today's distrust in big tech is healthy, not distrust in general. I think, Devon, it's your turn.
Right. Well, I'm not sure, Pierre, why quote today's necessarily changes it too much, but fair enough. I'm trying to get at, so I think if I'm understanding what Siona said correctly, it may not be, right? The notion that, hey, Devon, oh, they're all companies. Well, I don't know why anyone should necessarily quote trust, right? The notion of the marketplace is arm's length. It is stiff arm. It is not, oh, we're all buddies, right? Go back to Eisenhower and the notion of distrusting the military industrial complex, which he knew intimately. So my question is, are you really saying, hey, they're just actors and we should trust them? Because that's what I heard you say. And boy, if that's true, that makes no sense to me.
No, I think this presses again on what the terms of the, what the call of the debate is. Today's distrust does encapsulate.
Forgive me, I think that was at Siona, but go ahead.
Oh, sorry, Siona.
Go ahead,
I'll start. She'll tag team. Today's distrust is emotion driven. It is not. In fact, that the very notion of distrust is not that you are looking calmly at the facts and thinking through sort of costs and benefits and likely results. Today's distrust, and maybe distrust in general, but I think the distrust that we're here to talk about with big tech is a pervasive assumption that whatever decisions are made, whether Facebook decides to delete an account or not decide to delete an account, whatever decision is made is probably made for not only selfish reasons, but in a way that will lead to harm. So, with that understanding of trust, which I think is a fair representation of how people react to big tech and what they're demanding of their lawmakers, it is not simply, it's not simply a lack of trust. It is an emotional drive to perceive everything as a threat.
Okay, Siena, do you want to have a, so just a quick tag team and then your question for the other side.
Yeah, I want to reiterate that the opposite of distrust is not about trust. We've had conversations in this conference about trust and trustworthiness that goes hand in hand with regulation, right? That those two things are not in conflict with each other. And so what I am arguing is that this societal level distrust, right, which is really what you're charged with defending, is not useful. And that doesn't mean you have to have intimate trust with the industry.
Good, thank you. So do you have a question for the other side, Siena?
Yeah, sure. And I'll leave it open to both the pros. And to ask, if you think about distrust and our current moment, right? So we're in the midst of this pandemic, right? Could big tech, if there wasn't a level of distrust that we have, had done more to help us manage the pandemic? And of course, I'm specifically asking if distrust didn't do us harm in the last year.
I don't know. I doubt it. I doubt that if we loved Google and we loved Apple and we loved Facebook, that the material conditions of society would be different today. I think if we had political leaders we trusted, then maybe several 100,000 fewer people would have died, and that would be a good thing. I think I can support that. But I don't think tech was the problem that led us to where we are in the pandemic, and nor do I imagine that they could have been much more of the solution, right? I don't trust, Zoom, but I'm glad Zoom, helped us continue to have an operating law school. And so again, our brief isn't all tech companies are untrustworthy, but yeah, I don't, life is pretty bad right now for a lot of people. And I'm not sure trust in tech would have made it any better.
Okay,
I have
thank
nothing
you.
to add.
Okay, so Paul and Devin, your turn for a question.
I mean, I'm going to break the first rule of cross-examination.
Fight Club?
And right, Fight Club too, and ask you a question that I don't know the answer to, and you're probably just gonna whatever. Okay, let me just ask the question. No more wind up. So the question is, so we've talked about speech. So let's talk about income inequality, right? So we have kind of an economic and industrial system, which is where your opening comments were more situated, that has led to just kind of dramatic disparities in material wealth. And again, I don't think it's the only cause, but I think it's a pretty profound driver when you look at multi-billionaires who are wealthier than some of the wealthiest people in human history, while at the same time you're looking at a hollowing out of the middle class. And so maybe that's not only tech that's to blame, but it's hard to argue that there's something broken in our economic system that would produce billionaires at such a high rate, while leaving other people scrambling to put food on the table. And so do you think that is a healthy source of distrust, that there's something about the very economic kind of allocation of resources that we should worry about and we should clamor for some sort of change about?
I have thoughts, but do you want to go first, Sienna?
Go ahead, I'll tag team.
So, so first of all, I mostly agree with the premise of your question, but I do want to point out that there is some debate over how well we understand the level of inequality, because household, composition of the household has changed. And so just assuming that inequality has gotten much worse, it seems to me is something that comes with highly efficient and productive market that has some solutions that don't relate to distrusting what the actual firms are doing or producing, and moreover has solutions related to wealth redistribution, labor policies, and again, I guess that the distrust, the hatred of Mark Zuckerberg is not going to lead to better tax policy.
Sienna?
Yeah, I would just add, so I'm not a lawyer or a law professor. I'm actually, my area is public finance, right? And so, I mean, your question is better suited to a public finance conference. And again, like just to push this point home, public finance conferences are like less fun than these conferences. And I think, that emotion is so ill-directed right now. To be upset with tech billionaires about our general income inequality, right, is I understand why you want to argue it and why you want to argue it here, but that's an issue of policy. And I agree, you mentioned it, Paul, I agree with you that this is an element of why we can be disheartened or disappointed with policymakers.
Thank you. Jane, do you have a question?
Oh, Sienna, do you have one? Because I'm not really, I forgot to think about one.
Yeah, I mean, this might take a little too long, and again, can go to both pros. But you mentioned like which distrust we can talk about or not talk about, but we could also throw that back and say like, okay, so distrust of big tech, you're arguing is quite warranted, and they're not using their capital in a way that is beneficial to society. And the perennial question is okay, so what policy? Right, so what fix? Now, I actually hesitate to ask this because it's a discussion, frankly, I think I've been on panels with all of you, and we've had those kinds of conversations before, but like that is the next step. And do you think that policy is going to be an easy fix here?
I think you would be naive to think there's an easy fix here, right? Absolutely. So I think, and I think I said this badly in my opening, that what we need is energy, and we need emotion, and we need, a call for change. And we need it to come state, local, federal governments, other, international partners. We need it within shareholder groups. And so yeah, we need to fix a lot of things that are broken. And you're right, the four of us would probably have four very different menus of change. But one thing that I want to say is, without emotion driving some of that, and some emotion in the form of distrust, we're never going to see that. We're going to be complacent, and we're going to kind of, continue in our downward descent that we're in. And distrust is one thing that'll help get us there.
And on that wavelength, to then tag and hopefully turn into a question is, right, so, I think you said, yeah, we know that we need some regulation, but the point is, you're not going to get that without something more of what Paul and I are talking about, right? You're not going to get any action. You're not going to get people to the table to start talking about, maybe from slightly cuckoo land into where we need, until you get people going, damn it, something's wrong, right? That's the American way. We don't fix things until they look insane. And you get to the table because of that. Then you have people say, okay, sort it out. But, if I heard you right, I'm asking you, okay, if you think there's a type of regulation, how do we get there? How do we even get to that stage?
Wait, but so you need people to get to the table. What's the problem that they're supposed to be fixing? What specifically is the problem?
I mean, again, we had a litany, like pick the one you want to fix, right? We could talk about information flows. We can talk about privacy. We can talk about security. We could talk about racism and hatred, right? There's a lot of things we can talk about workers and inequality, right?
Any one of failures. You can talk about antitrust, right? You can talk about, is it actually getting there, right? This is something both of you know well. The questions of how is it functioning well, right? Like, the history of big American business has been, you get a whole bunch of runway, and then we kind of go, okay, you've hit an equilibrium. We're looking for something different.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Fiona.
I want to push back against the notion that that fostering this level of distrust and letting it grow is going to push the policymakers over the edge. I mean, I think the most likely, at least from recent moves, of policy change that we might see would come potentially in the antitrust area, right? Like, there's been a lot of movement in that area. Again, who knows? We've been talking about a privacy legislation for my entire professional career. And I don't know that that's being advanced because there's this mass populist emotion that of distrust about size, right? We might feel it, but that's not what's pushing this along. And again, pushing the distrust might not take us to the legislation and policy that you particularly think are the best and most efficient fixes.
Well, I don't even think, I don't think we, at least Paul's comments and mine were already in debate about whether we even understand the privacy problem. And I mean, we, like the eggheads, right? So, I mean, if I agree, I actually think I agree with Devin and Paul that distrust might push us to adopt something like GDPR, but that's not good. Or, so there may be, there may be.
I see you trying to trap me into having the vote be, is GDPR good? Last year, I tried to turn the debate into, do you like Donald Trump? And I failed miserably in that effort.
Yeah, and GDPR is another amping up of the egghead factor, a general data protection regulation in the EU,
Yep.
I believe.
Yep.
So we're almost done with this round. Jane and Siona, you get a last question for Devin and Paul, if you like. Okay.
I think we ended with a question.
Yeah,
Yes,
I think it's their turn, actually.
You did. Okay,
so
good.
If there's a chance for a 30-second answer, Siona, I would suggest that part of what you said was, hello, California, land of Silicon Valley, did get up in arms. And you could say it's not a great outcome, but I would say that is an answer to, did it stimulate a whole bunch of stuff? Yeah.
Yeah, and I would say it's not a great outcome.
Well, okay.
That's a wonderful point on which to end this phase, and I just wish we had another half hour for it. But we get to be treated to another 15 minutes of our advocates doing the pros and cons. So we'll do the same order we did last time. So we'll start closing arguments with Professor Paul Ohm.
Thank you very much to our worthy opponents on the other side, because this was the rare debate. I've now done this 4 times where I think I learned a lot from hearing you all go. And I think what I've learned is we probably agree that there's some broken things in the world, but we sort of disagree about how we're going to go about fixing it and the role that emotion might play in that, and the role that the emotion of the masses, whoever they are, might play in that. And I think twice I heard from Jane a call for abandoning emotion in our policy debates. She talked about dispassionate decision-making, and then later on she decried emotion-driven approaches. And I think I heard the same from Siona. And I guess my final plea is we need emotion, that we are living in a really, really dire time where everything is broken. And I don't think that sounds hysterical in 2021, like it probably did when I said those very words 4 years ago, probably for the first time. And that small little fixes are not up to the moment. And deference to companies to do the right thing after we've been shown 15 times in a row that they have no idea what the right thing is, much less how to put it into play, is not the right thing. And so we need forces that go way beyond the current give and pull of polite conversation and polite debate. In some ways, I don't want to go all Che Guevara on you, but it's we're governed. We are governed by these forces, and yet we don't have institutional ways to have a say in how we're governed. And when you find yourself in that situation, when you wake up and you are kind of ruled and you don't have the ear of the rulers, well, emotion is pretty warranted at that point. And so I'm not calling for a full-blown revolution, but something a lot more energetic than we currently have is what's needed. And since I lot in with Josh Hawley, I want to be clear, right? This emotion has to be tempered with reason and with truth and with productive debate like the ones we've been having, but it still should be rooted in a dissatisfaction with the status quo, which manifests in lots of ways, and emotion is some of it and distrust is some of it. And so I think I'm saying that today's lack of distrust can lead to change. And if all you do is sit back and trust technology and tech companies, that's a trap. You shouldn't trust. You should act, and you should control, and you should scrutinize, and you should reform. Trust me, today's distrust in big tech is healthy. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Professor Bambar.
Okay, Paul just said we are ruled, which is very Zuboff-y. And I want to prove the point that this is what most people actually think. We are being ruled by big tech. It is just not true. So Facebook, it's true that the Facebook algorithm finds posts that are, salacious clickbaity, right? But it actually does less purging of the non-clickbait items than people do themselves. There's now pretty good research on this, that as much as the algorithm kind of feeds us, the Twinkies, we still look at the buffet that they give us in the timeline and pick the worst items to engage with. And so Facebook is not our puppet master. We are just suffering from problems of low friction. And no CEO can save us from certain types of problems that are just a matter of us being able to have better access to speech technologies. The other thing is, when asked about COVID, Paul thought that there wasn't much that tech could have done to help. And I completely agree. I mean, I completely disagree. If there is something that apps could have done in terms of so first of all, that tech could have done more of in terms of testing, COVID testing, and definitely apps and tech companies could have done in terms of risk scoring, messaging, figuring out, using social data in order to figure out risk, communicating much more effectively than what we had today. We can look at what South Korea did and take away some of the, cultural and government, stuff that would not fly here, and we would still be left with a lot of potential that was unmet in the United States. And the reason it was unmet is that neither Apple nor Google nor any policymaker could touch it. They could not even get around to promoting or really doing anything other than banning the use of data for pooling together and figuring out how to manage this health crisis. And that was during the worst crisis of all of our lives. And so it suggests that the distrust is having lots of causing lots of inhibition and forcing us to not have options that we could have had were it not for the unhealthy distrust. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Professor Desai.
All right. So, all right, let's suppose, right, some of this distrust is fueled by the crazy, as it were. I'm with Paul. In fact, which is not something I normally say for anyone who knows Paul and or me, but there is a paradox, right? A very interesting paradox. The more engaged partisanship there is, the more engaged political action there is on both sides. So I'm wondering what we're afraid of here, right? Like, it's not, you know, you're just like, oh, you're not all manipulated, but are we really saying that if enough people get going on one side with their distrust, that the folks who are arguing against that aren't going to rally? In fact, you get the rally. You get this engagement to have that rational debate to move things forward. That distrust is what gets people from being complacent off their butts and doing. Is some of it out on the fringes? Of course, but that's also going to bring the people who are rational to inside to say, whoa, don't break it off. I'm glad you guys brought up the tech thing and COVID, because here's the thing. Silicon Valley screwed up. They called it a contact tracing app. It wasn't. They didn't even understand what they were doing. Why trust that? Like, oh, we're so awesome. We're going to save you. And they screwed it up so badly that whatever was good at the back end wasn't going to get out there. And by the way, there were other startups that did get to build contact tracing apps. So it's not like it got completely banned. It's still there. It's the disruptors. It was the small players that were the ones who was like, let me show you how to do this right. Silicon Valley's own ego just was like, we're going to be your saviors again. And the problem is that's just a hollow story. There's enough people who are like, yeah, it's healthy to go, you know, we've seen you kind of do this and you wade in as if you know what you're doing. And you think that because you understand X, you can apply it over to Y. It's the same hammer, right? For every freaking nail. You turn everything into that bang, bang, bang. And with that, I'll stop.
Thank you very much. And Professor Listerkin, you get the last word.
I love having the last word. Thanks. Yeah, I mean, this is really interesting because we're trying to change people's minds, and that's an incredibly hard thing to do. I mean, we're literally trying to get a few people to decide that what they said an hour ago was wrong. So let me first respond to Paul and Devin's point that voting that distrust of big tech is not healthy is in no way changing, you know, your deep-seated feelings about tech. You're not waving any white flags. We're not even saying that that means you need to trust big tech. And I would also say that we're not arguing that emotion is bad. We're arguing that distrust is not useful, right? So imagine if today we weren't debating whether distrust of big tech is healthy, but we were debating if distrust of big pharma is healthy, right? So let me ask a different question. Do you distrust Pfizer, right? And it's a loaded question. I'm trying to manipulate everyone here, but it's a loaded question on purpose. Because when I hear, do you distrust Pfizer? That question doesn't resonate with me at all, right? You ask me if I distrust Facebook. I could talk and talk and talk and talk, but you ask me if I distrust Pfizer, it has no emotional response, even though I'm emotional about Pfizer, right? I'm rooting for Pfizer right now. And I think that they should be regulated to the moon and back, right? And I think that Pfizer should, you know, be rewarded heavily, financially, right, for breakthrough innovation like a COVID vaccine, and that they charge too much for other treatments and medicines, right? And I can have all of those different opinions, and I can feel passionate about it, but I'm having all of those opinions completely outside of the rubric of distrust. Right? And that is a healthier place to be for our society when we're talking about big tech. Big tech is so in our lives. I understand why the feeling of distrust is more resonant there, but far from being automatons or technocrats, right? I think the emotion we want to move is distrust. And that doesn't mean that you have to trust the companies, but it means that, you know, we think comprehensively about the costs and benefits, and that we don't follow counterproductive routes to policy ends. So thank you everyone for listening, and let's see what happens.
Thank you very much to all of you. And actually, Vanessa, if you could bring up the poll. So folks, you get to rethink your opinion. Same question as last time. Today's distrust in big tech is healthy. Give us your opinion. While you think and find your mouse or your fingertip and do the click, a couple of things to just pass the time. The first is not just to pass the time. Thank you so much to all 6 of the debaters. This was certainly very entertaining, which was the highest priority. But actually, the most important thing was that we actually had a substantive debate. I would love to see the transcript of this, because I think both sides brought very carefully considered and very well articulated arguments to the table. And I think the audience has a very difficult decision to make. While you're finalizing that decision, let me just remind you that today is the 2nd day. Tomorrow is the 3rd day. We kick off tomorrow with a keynote discussion by a bunch of heavy hitters, an FCC commissioner, an FTC commissioner, and the Attorney General of a certain state, probably Colorado, I don't know, I can't be sure. There's going to be a panel on innovation and innovating for trust, moderated by Professor Brad Bernthal, and another panel on legislative and regulatory priorities to codify trust, moderated by Professor Blake Reed. And our closing keynote is by Afua Bruce, who is the Chief Program Officer at DataKind. So let's close the poll now, and let's see what happened.
Oh,
and
man.
in fact, there
Fake
was
news.
a shift. There was a shift, and one can argue about what that shift meant, but I think regardless of what the numbers said, and Vanessa will put those numbers up in the slide in a moment when we finish, I think this was a marvelous debate. I think all of us had to think very hard when we weren't laughing very hard. So thank you to all of you, and hopefully see some of you next year. Bye-bye.
Yeah, that was really fun.
Good job, guys.
Bye,
Well
all.
done. I think that was a record for turnaround. Well done. So, all right. I think
Oh,
we're
wow. Well, we probably started at a record, the easiest possible baseline. So
yeah, I think we're still on stage, but that was awesome. I had fun.
Yeah.
Good job. Thanks, everybody.
And just to double check, like, this was all partially posturing, okay?
Yeah.
Okay. And Siona, I don't know if Siona's already gone, but just,
All right, guys, let's do it. Let's
very
do it
good.
again before
Sign
too
off.
long. That was
All
awesome.
right. Bye,
Thank
all.
you.
Jane,
And
great to
we'll
see
hand
you.
back to the organizers, back to Victoria.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you, Pierre, and thank you to each of our debaters for providing